Hey, this is Jeff Ratcliffe here. Let's talk about the value in daily fantasy for a minute. The big prizes, yeah, they're attractive, but you have to finish in the top 2% out of thousands of experts to win any real money. So even on your best day, you still feel like you're losing. Now you can play something better. Stat Hero. Stat Hero is a house-based game that combines the best of daily fantasy and survivor pools. Each Stat Hero contest lasts multiple days, but requires only one entry fee, so your money lasts longer. Yes, you can play multiple days with only one entry fee. Stat Hero gives you smaller contests and more chances to win, and no more competing with sharks or experts ever, because your only competition is Stat Hero itself. Survive the game and download Stat Hero today and see how the face of daily fantasy has changed. Finally, a game designed for the rest of us. Stat Hero now open for NFL and NBA. For more information, please visit stathero.com. What is up? It's Pro Football Focus Fantasy Podcast. My name is Jeff Ratcliffe. It's Wednesday, January 29th. Super Bowl week in full swing. And my player props are officially filed to the site. I believe they're already up on the site as I'm recording this here on Wednesday afternoon. We will go through them on this show, but of course, the easy way, if you want to go back to find them, just go to pff.com. It's a great time to just go there in general because, of course, we have that promo code rocking right now, PFF30. But anyway, we'll talk about that on the show today. Also have a few other items to get to, so I want to lead things off with just a little bit of the news out there right now. On the free agency front, Dak Prescott, of course, potentially, but let's be real, he's not going to be a free agent. He did talk to Ian Rappaport saying that he has confidence that he's going to be extended. Yeah, I share that confidence. Players like Dak Prescott just don't reach free agency at that age, coming off of that season. And love or hate what the Cowboys did as a whole, it was a good season for Dak Prescott. A step forward indeed. They're going to figure something out here. I doubt it's a franchise tag situation, but we'll see. We'll see. It's highly unlikely that he is not in a Cowboys uniform next year. It'll be interesting to see how things change, yet potentially remain the same there, because obviously retaining their offensive coordinator, but with a different head coach. Does anything change on the offensive front? I don't think it does, but regardless, it'll be interesting to see the transition under Mike McCarthy. The other interesting note here, so earlier in the week, Jay Glazer said that essentially Phillip Rivers and the Chargers were done. And it came out as if he was reporting it, but now he's backtracked that and essentially is saying that it's what he thinks. It's not an official report. I think, and this isn't a knock on Jay Glazer. I don't think that that's the case here at all. I think this is symptomatic of a larger problem that we have as a group who consumes a ton of football news. I've talked about it on this pod before, but it is very, very, very important to understand the difference between Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, Jay Glazer, Jason Lockefor, whoever the insider is, commenting on a question they are asked, or whether it's a radio interview, TV interview, whatever, and them reporting something. Those are two different things. Now, granted, when Adam Schefter comments on something, or Jay Glazer in this instance, when they comment on something, they know a whole heck of a lot more about these subjects than most of us do because they're so plugged in. But they don't know everything. And if they are not reporting something, then they don't officially know it. Sometimes, and more often than not, and there are a lot of folks in our industry who are guilty of this, and I can't say that I'm a saint either, but in recent years, I've become very conscious of this. But so often do people take what these guys say as gospel. Just because they're saying it, it is fact. And that's not the case unless they are reporting it. If they're reporting it, they have a good source, a source who is good enough for them to actually go on the record and say, this is what's going down. Jay Glazer was not reporting this about Phillip Rivers, though his sense is Phillip Rivers will not be back with the team. And I'll tell you this is another thing that I've learned over the years. Certain insiders have more insight to specific teams than other teams. I'm not going to get into the specifics of who with what, but just be aware of that, and you will get a sense. There are certain insiders who will get things way before the rest of the insiders, and they'll get them right. That usually means they have a really freaking good source with that team. And of course, you're not going to know who that source is, and that is what it is. But regardless, just a note there, I don't expect Rivers back. I think that's just the general sense among a lot of folks out there, especially when he moved. Of course, moving to Florida isn't necessarily an indicator that you are absolutely leaving your team. It could be. It from what I heard, if you have a lot of money and make a lot of money, it's a good state to live in just because of the tax laws. Regardless, we'll see with Rivers. It's going to be interesting. We're also going to see what happens with Greg Olsen, because it does sound like, hey, Greg Olsen could be in the booth if he doesn't return to the field. This is a guy who obviously has been one of the league's best receiving tight ends, especially over the course of his career spanning over a decade here. He's been excellent, but he's also been banged up over the last several seasons. And even so, when he's on the field, he's still been a difference maker. Obviously, he's one of those guys who highlights this previous generation of tight end where you didn't have to be a guy who could run a 4.4, like a Noah Fant athletic freak. The era of the athletic freak tight end, though, it has officially begun, and I'm very intrigued to see what happens with these younger guys as they mature with the position. But regardless, hey, Greg Olsen could hop right into the booth for Fox. Will he have a Tony Romo impact or a Jason Witten impact or somewhere in between? That question obviously still to be determined. Obviously, Romo is on another planet in terms. It's just so rare for a guy to just step right into the booth and have, just a massive impact like Romo has had. It's a tough job. Witten didn't necessarily flourish in that job. We've seen other folks who step into it and don't necessarily flourish. Could Greg Olsen flourish? Sure, he could. Anything to make those games interesting, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. So anyway, we'll see what happens there with Greg Olsen. Another note here before we get to our player prop bets. We do have XFL official rosters. They were announced Monday evening. And I'm going to go through these really quickly here. So Tampa Bay, Mark Trestman is the head coach. We know that Mark Trestman likes to throw to those running backs. In terms of the running back, we have the notable name is Mac Brown there. So you may have remembered him from the cup of coffee that he had in the NFL. Aaron Murray will be their quarterback. They do have Shontavious Jones, who was pretty good in the AAF. And then, of course, Antonio Callaway on that roster. Moving over to Seattle. So Jim Zorn is the head coach of the Seattle Dragons. I like that name. You know what? They all sound like early 90s unofficially, non-licensed video game team names. You know what I'm saying? If you're around about my age, if you're like an elder millennial or a young Gen Xer, you know what I'm talking about. Those games always had those fun, goofy names. Anyway, Seattle Dragons sounds like that. BJ Daniels is really it looks like he's projecting as a starting quarterback. Kenneth Barrows there played with Miami, also had a decent run in the AAF last year, along with Trey Williams at running back. I'm excited for the wide receivers here. Keenan Reynolds is an interesting player. Cason Williams, also pretty interesting at wide receiver for the Seattle Dragons. Moving on to the St. Louis Battlehawks. And this, of course, is the team of Kristen Michael. Hey, let's just lead with the biggest name there. Actually, two kind of brokeback guys on this, because Kristen Michael was the ultimate brokeback for so many people. But Matt Jones also, and no, not that Matt Jones from Jacksonville, etc. This is the Matt Jones who was a running back for the Redskins. Taylor Heineke is the quarterback on that team. And Marquette King punting for them. I actually met Marquette a few years ago over at CBS. He's an interesting dude for sure. He'll be on that roster. If you played AAF, you might remember DeMornay Pearsonell. He played, I forget what team he was on last year. Anyway, it was fun while it lasted, AAF fantasy folks. Moving over to the New York Guardians, Matt McGloin headlining that roster. It's Kevin Gilbride. New York fans can't get away from Kevin Gilbride. Yeah, Matt McGloin, will he beat out Luis Perez for the starting job? It does sound like he's going to, but maybe not. Apple CEO Tim Cook at running back. No, the other Tim Cook. And then one of my favorites, actually, he may have been my favorite from the AAF, Mikhail McKay. This dude can ball. I mean, he's not an NFL talent, but that's kind of the nice thing about the XFL. There are going to be guys who play decent enough in the XFL who, yeah, maybe they never make an NFL roster, but it doesn't mean they're horrible football players. Remember, the NFL is the elite of the elite of the elite. There are Division I dudes who do a decent enough job at the Division I level and never get a sniff at a 53-man roster. They make it into camp, of course, but it's hard to make a 53-man. It's even harder to dress on Sundays. It's ridiculously hard. Doesn't mean they're bad at football. Anyway, moving over to the Los Angeles Wildcats. LA, as if you needed another football team, but you got one anyway. The Wildcats, Winston Moss is the head coach, but you have Norm Chow as the OC there. So folks in that area obviously very familiar with Norm Chow. Anyway, Josh Johnson will be under center for them. We know his dual threat ability. Trey McBride, remember him, and Nelson Spruce. Love Nelson Spruce on that roster there. Moving on to the Houston Roughnecks. I like that name as well. It's not as good as Rough Rider, UCFL folks, but anyway, Connor Cook is the lead name on this roster. Andre Williams, who played for the Giants, will be on that roster as well. Sammy Coates, remember him from the Pittsburgh Steelers, also there for the Houston Roughnecks. The DC Defenders, which I guess out of all of these is my favorite. It's definitely my favorite logo and might be my favorite name. Just well thought out. Anyway, it's Pep Hamilton and Cardale Jones will be under center. DJ Pumphrey, Jarrell Presley. It's a pretty loaded roster. Rashad Ross, who was one of the best players in the AAF at wide receiver. Eli Rogers, Simi Cobbs. Remember him, former, if you're a draftnik, you remember the name Simi Cobbs. Not a bad roster there at all. That's going to be a fun team. And then finally, the Dallas Renegades, Bob Stoops. So Landry Jones under center. He did get banged up in the build-up here to the opener. We'll see if he's able to go for the start of the season. But if not, he's not expected to miss a ton of time. Cameron Artis-Payne, who was on the Carolina Panthers for about 30 years, it seemed like, is on the Dallas Renegades, along with Lance Dunbar. Remember him. And I love the name Jazz Ferguson. That's probably your best wideout, most recognizable wideout. I just like his name, but most recognizable wideout there on the Dallas Renegades. More on the XFL to come, but I figured I'd at least mention the rosters are official. Before we get to these player prop bets, I got to tell you about our friends at Thrive Fantasy. Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy for the big game. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy sports app for player props. They've eliminated the need to do countless hours of research because they only ask you about the top tier athletes in a respected sport. Choose 10 out of the top 20 prop options to build your lineup. Each prop has a fantasy point total associated with the over or under based on its likelihood to occur. That's pretty fun right there. The more points a selection is worth, the riskier it is. So rack up the most points to win a share of the prize pool. Thrive has over $20,000 guaranteed for the big game between the 49ers and Chiefs. and a $500 free roll. Use the promo code PFF when you sign up today, and you'll receive an instant match up to $25 on your first deposit. Download Thrive Fantasy on the App Store or Play Store by visiting their website, www.thrivefantasy.com. Do we still say www today? Should I say the whole http://? Do we even say backslash anymore? Anyway, sign up and prop up today. That's fun. I love me player props, and it's a great lead in to our talk about player props. Look at that. Look at what we did there. We may have thought about this beforehand. You never know. Anyway, this is the single best day of the year to bet on player props, and it's not just because you have more available bets than any other day of the year, but it's also a day that is skewed by soft money by a lot of amateur bettors, and what typically ends up happening is you get better lines as a result. And I know this for a fact. I talked about it last podcast with my interview last week with one of the bookmakers over at the Westgate. He said it flat out. He said it on air. It's no secret. So it's a great day of the year. If you're able to do so, I highly recommend getting a little bit of action in, and this should certainly get you started. So what we did is we took a look at the lines over at FanDuel, and then obviously what I like to do is compare them to our projections. You can, if you don't like to use our projections, you can use your own or whatever source you like, but I would not just go into this and say, oh, Patrick Mahomes, 300.5 passing yards. I think he's going over. What are you basing that on, right? You think, feel, or believe that he's going over, but it doesn't mean anything. And when you actually look at our projections, we have him going under. Now, it's not one of the plays I'm going to make because I don't think there's a big enough edge on that one to make that play, but that's the thought process. And I'll tell you, last year was a prime example of this. Last year, my model that I ran said unders on so many of the bets. It wasn't all of them. And it ultimately said that the over-under total was going to be way under as well. I didn't necessarily agree 100% with what the model was saying. And hey, it was whatever. It was like a 56.5 over-under, 55.5 over-under. I thought, well, hey, this is going to be a high-scoring game. No, it was a super low-scoring game. Now, the model wasn't right on that. I wasn't even close to the overall total. But the fact that the model was saying these lines are too high, I believed it. In the instance today, for this weekend's lines, and they're going to shift, but they're not going to shift dramatically. Like maybe the odds will move on some of these lines. Maybe the line will move up or down like a yard if you're looking at receiving, rushing yards, passing yards. It's not going to move for the passing touchdowns. Probably won't move for passing attempts or pass completions either. But either way, but anyway, it's actually saying over on some of these. So I found that kind of interesting. My model says that the over-under for the game is fairly spot on right now, and I have not done anything. I said it on Monday's pod that we would look at it through the week, and if we start to see upward movement, then maybe we hit the under. It hasn't moved really anywhere. We're still at a consensus of 54.5. But that could change a lot as more money floods in by the end of the week. So we'll update that again on Friday. Anyway, here's what I'm seeing here. Here are the plays that I'm going to make on FanDuel's sportsbook. And let's be clear that while you may not see these exact lines on other books, you're going to see lines that are relatively close. All right. So let's start with rushing yards. And I have 52.5 for Damian Williams. We are taking the over on that one. It's only a slight over, but I think Damian Williams is going to be heavily used in this one. It is a tough matchup, but the line is in a respectable range, so I'm going to take the over there. Patrick Mahomes rushing yards way too high. 30.5, and I get it. I understand why it is high because of the last 2 weeks. I don't see this as a game where we're going to see Patrick Mahomes rumbling down the sideline for a touchdown or anything like that. And if we look at what he did through most of the season, this line is way too high. So this is actually one of the best bets I have on the board. I'm playing the under. By the way, just because it's one of the best bets on the board doesn't mean it's guaranteed to hit. I am not a tout. I'm not telling you to call in my 800 number right now for my stone cold lock of the week. I'm saying on my board, it has one of the highest edges, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna happen. I can't guarantee that. So that's why I love to spread my bets around. I'm not gonna make one play, because if I make one play and lose, I'm going to lose all of my money, right? One $500 bet isn't as good as 50 $10 bets. Because if I play 50 $10 bets, am I going to hit them all? Hell no. No way. I am not going to hit all of them. Am I going to hit more than 50%? Am I going to hit, say, 26 out of 50? I like my chances there. And not last week, but 2 weeks ago in the conference championship round, the bets that I made, now I didn't play 50 bets on FanDuel. I played 27 of them in my column, and I hit 17 out of the 27 right. So over 60%. In other words, yeah, we made some money in the conference championship round. So I'm confident there. Anyway, moving on, Jimmy Garoppolo. We have him. He's at 3.5 rushing yards, and I'm going to take the over on his rushing yards. Not touching Raheem Mostert. We still don't know about Tevin Coleman, and as I promised, I would wait as long as I could. I always try to get this up for you rush hour folks coming home on that commute. I don't have a practice report yet, unfortunately, though, for Tevin Coleman. Anyway, we'll update it on Friday, but I'm not going to make any moves, and any new bets that I might place by Friday, I'll let you know on this pod. Anyway, not touching Raheem Mostert. So let's move on. Let's talk a little receiving yards here. I do like Mecole Hardman at 22.5, taking an over on him. Hardman's one of those sneaky guys. I'm actually using him in my showdown lineup. And I think you get some value there, bang for your buck, some decent leverage as well. By the way, Kevin Cole's showdown article is live over at PFF.com, so go check that one out. Anyway, George Kittle, I'm going to take an under on 72.5 receiving yards. It was revealed, and this doesn't impact this bet, but it was revealed that he's been playing with a torn labrum in his shoulder since last year, since the 2018 season, and he's not going to have surgery. So he's playing through pain. That dude's a warrior. But I think prioritizing him is obviously going to be key here, and I wouldn't underestimate the Honey Badger. Even though it's a quote-unquote good matchup, Tyrann Mathieu, he's a gamer. He's a gamer, and he is going to be covering George Kittle for a chunk of this game. Anyway, moving on to Emmanuel Sanders, playing an over on him at 41.5. I know that he was non-existent in the conference championship game. I'm not going to really hold that against him because they didn't throw the football, and the model does like the over there. We'll circle back to receptions in a minute. Demarcus Robinson will be taking an under on Robinson. I think it's a Hardman game. My model likes Hardman a little bit more this week. 20.5 receiving yards. We're going under there. Kendrick Bourne, I talked about how I like the idea of, Kendrick Bourne, because the slot receiver tends to do a little bit better than the outside receivers against Kansas City. So it's a low line. It's 21.5. I'm taking an over on that line right there. Moving on to receptions, Deebo Samuel over 4.5. I think Deebo's going to be used pretty heavily. I think the line's pretty solid. It's not a big edge there. But in the Super Bowl, I'm more willing to expand my range than any other week of the year. So week 21, we have 20 weeks of data points. I'm going to bet a little bit of a wider range. In the beginning of the season, I'm only betting when I have a pretty big edge on either side, either over or under the line. Here, even if it's relatively close and I have an edge, I'm going to use that edge. So I would say based on where I have it, based on the implied line, I have about a 7% edge, give or take. I'm going to use that 7% edge here. Emmanuel Sanders over 3.5 receptions, taking the over there as well. And both of those are favorable odds. Plus 116 for Deebo Samuel, plus 126 for Emmanuel Sanders. So we're going to exploit that if we can. And like I said, that sort of correlates with Emmanuel Sanders' receiving yards. Raheem Mostert, 1.5 receptions. I like the over there. I am going to place this bet now with the full realization that I'm going to have to go back and look at this line and look at my projections. My projections do have Tevin Coleman playing, by the way, but look at the line, look at how everything moves if the book changes things, if/when Tevin Coleman is declared active. If he's declared inactive, then we have to look as well. So we're going to circle back to this. And that could be on Sunday, unfortunately, where we have to do that. Demarcus Robinson under 1.5. Again, I don't see him being used too heavily here. Let's move on to rushing and receiving yards. I love the combo bet. So Raheem Mostert, we're going to go under 90.5. Again, we'll have to circle back to that one, but I do think that's a little high at 90.5 combined rushing and receiving yards. Also, Damian Williams will play an over on 82.5 combined rushing and receiving yards. This is one of those where I do think, again, we double dip because I'm going over on I'm not touching his receiving yards, but we're going over on his rushing yards, so we sort of double dip with that one. A couple more passing stats to get to round this out. Pass completions, Patrick Mahomes, 24.5 feels a little heavy for what I expect out of this game, so I am playing an under. It's not a big edge on that one, though. Passing attempts, Jimmy G, 29.5, almost certainly impacted by last week. It's a little low, so we're going to play an over there. Finally, passing touchdowns, over. This is like the easiest bet on the board. This is the gimme putt of the day. Over 1.5 passing touchdowns. I'm going to play it on this one. I'm going to try and split the uprights again. Doesn't always work, but my model does say play the over on the 1.5 and the under, because you have both lines here, the under on the 2.5 touchdown line for Patrick Mahomes. Finally, Jimmy Garoppolo, I'm going to play an over on 1.5 passing touchdowns for him. So there you go. What's that about? I think it's 19 bets there for the game. I'll update you if I have any more for Friday's show by then. And remember, you're going to see pretty similar lines elsewhere. Of course, we'll also update Tevin Coleman for Friday. So that'll tie a bow on the playoff run. Yes, you won't hear the playoff thing anymore at the beginning of the podcast. All right, that'll be the last one. But that's it for today's show. Head on over to PFF.com. PFF30 is the promo code. 30% off. That's freaking good. $60 off an elite subscription. At Jeff Ratcliffe on Twitter and Instagram. I'll catch you on the flip side. For Pro Football Focus, I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out of here.